Well, thank you everybody for joining us for this episode of the MyCom Church Marketing Podcast. My name is Dan Wunderlich. I'm a United Methodist pastor, and I am so excited about today's episode because we're kicking off a new occasional feature on the podcast where we interview real-life United Methodist leaders and church communicators, digging into the practical details of how they do the work of church marketing and communications. And right from the beginning, I want to ask for your help. We would love to feature ministries of all sizes and styles from all over. And so if you know of a United Methodist ministry that is doing church marketing and communications well, please email us at podcast@umcom.org. That's podcast@umcom.org, and let us know. Also, if you have suggestions for questions for these episodes, things that you've always wanted to ask your fellow church communicators, you can send those over as well. Well, I am excited today to welcome in our very first guest for this series. Cathy Bien is the Director of Communications at the United Methodist Church of the Resurrection in Leawood, Kansas. You might recognize this as the church planted and led by Pastor Adam Hamilton. Cathy, thanks so much for being with us today and being willing to be our guinea pig for this first episode.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure.
Well, why don't we begin by having you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into church marketing and communications, and a bit about the ministry there at Church of the Resurrection.
Sure. Well, I actually have a journalism background, started out in journalism, then got a master's in business administration, and was working in public relations, communications for some corporate entities, for some nonprofits, just doing a little bit of everything. And got involved at Church of the Resurrection first as a member and met Pastor Adam Hamilton. And he said, hey, don't you do something in communication? Do you think you could maybe help the church? And, that was like 19 years ago when he was first getting the church started. And I started helping with, a newsletter 10 hours a week. And the church kind of grew, and so did my job and my responsibilities. Right now, I am the Director of Communications for the Church of the Resurrection, and that actually involves all four of our locations. Communication is a centralized support for our campuses in Leawood, downtown Kansas City, Olathe, and Blue Springs. I head up a team of 11, which sounds really big, but we're structured a little differently in that we're supporting 4 churches. We do all of the graphic design, print is all done in-house. We do 4-color digital printing in-house. We do all of the video production and support for worship, as well as special projects for Pastor Hamilton, and then also web and social media. So, kind of divide that up by four different campuses and, a congregation of about 22,000, and it's proportional. We've got a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, and that's a crazy place to be after being invited to just kind of start on a newsletter a couple decades ago.
18 years later, and, from one person working 10 hours a week, and at that time we had maybe 100 or so members, to 22,000 members and a communication team of 11. So
that's incredible.
It's been exciting just to see what God has done through this church.
Absolutely. Well, when we go to the 30,000-foot level and kind of look over everything that you're doing and how you all approach things, what would you describe as your approach or philosophy of church communications?
Sure. And I would say that from the time we had 100 members until today, that has really never changed. Our overall philosophy of church communication is, first of all, we're called to share the good news. That's what we're doing, is to introduce people to Jesus Christ and invite them to follow him. That's the basis for everything that we do. But from a communication perspective, I kind of identify 4 things that I feel like church communications ought to be doing. Inviting, inspiring, engaging, and celebrating. And so through all of our media, everything that we do, we try to kind of focus on those 4 ideas and make sure that that's what we're doing. As far as our marketing structure, that's really has not changed from the very beginning either. Our overall marketing approach is to empower our congregation. We know, and you can read studies of, all the different ways people end up at church, but the number one thing people say, they came to a church because someone invited them. So that's always been, basic for us, is how can we help our congregation to be invitational? So, whether that's a print piece that we do or a social media post or a video, whatever we do, all of those things we look at as tools that we encourage our congregation to share with their friends, neighbors, and coworkers.
That's so important, because even with a large team, 11 people is still quite small for how large the church is. And so it sounds like your goal is to mobilize the church members to do part of the work as well.
Exactly. I sometimes joke that it seems like I have a really large marketing team because I've got 22,000 members out there.
Yeah. Well, when we jump back to those 4 acts of church communications, those 4 steps in marketing, which of those is the easiest for you and your team, and which one is the one that is most challenging?
That's a good question. I think inviting is probably the easiest for us. From our senior pastor through all of our ministry staff, that is such a part of our culture and our DNA that we are very much focused on evangelism and on inviting and sharing and building the church. And so I think that, that's pretty easy because it really is just basic to our mission and our vision and our purpose. As a church gets larger and larger, I think engaging is maybe one of our challenges.
Yeah.
And the challenge we face there is that we have so many opportunities that sometimes you feel like you have ministries that are competing against each other.
Yeah.
And that's not just a large church thing. I mean, even in a small church, you're constantly going to have that challenge where each of your ministry areas feels like what they're doing is the most important thing. And, that's a daily challenge of bringing people together, helping people to collaborate and coordinate and, kind of be on the same page.
Well, no matter the size of the church, announcements are probably one of the biggest challenges, I would say, for church communicators.
Sure.
I write a church communications blog, and consistently for the last 2 years, no matter how much new content I write, a post I wrote about church announcements is always the most searched for and most read article. So it seems like we all struggle with finding a way to support all ministries and make sure everyone knows what's going on.
Right. And there's kind of that, if it's not announced on Sunday morning,
it doesn't exist, right?
It doesn't exist. And a couple ways we've kind of addressed that is we have a year-long planning calendar where we really kind of look at what our emphasis areas each week. And, that kind of helps to there are some things that just naturally the timing is such that this is a good time to announce that. So that's one thing is, just planning, scheduling, kind of giving everybody a turn in the hopper. We also have taken a bit of a different approach with our worship announcements we're trying to incorporate them into the message more and more. So, working closely, with our pastors and, rather than, we're going to have, this class, this coming up this week or this serve opportunity, if there's a way that can flow naturally from your sermon, from your message, so that people hear the word and then they have an immediate call to action. So that's one way to think about that is, we try to make sure that we always have 2 calls to action that are flowing naturally from the sermon for that weekend.
That's so great.
It's an ongoing challenge because there's just a lot going on. I'm also really working with some of our ministries to focus on more targeting the audiences for their announcements. I kind of have a tier of communication, and at that top tier are things that are all church and evangelism related. So those are things that are going to appeal to every single member of the church.
Yeah.
That second tier are what we kind of call all church segments. So that would be, a women's conference. It's broad-based. Everyone in the church is invited in that women's segment. Then we have what we call ministry segments. So trying to kind of approach a priority. Now, that doesn't always make some of our ministries, really happy. So then we try to work with them and say, so how else do we reach your target audience? We do a lot of email marketing, and, that's a great way to use your database, to figure out, who really is the segment that you want to reach with this.
Yeah.
We also have really tried to encourage our ministries to do kind of what we call follow-up marketing. So, you know the people who come to a serve opportunity. So let's reach out and contact those people and give them the information about an upcoming opportunity. Ideally, when you come to an event, a class, a serve event, any type of fellowship activity, when you leave there, you've got information about the next opportunity. So constantly thinking ahead and helping people, engaging people and then giving them the next step.
Yeah, that's great. And I love that you mentioned email, because I think for a lot of us, we focus so much on social media, but some of the data and statistics that I've been looking at recently say that email is actually a much more reliable way to reach folks, and people are much more open to sort of the announcements and being pitched an opportunity through email than necessarily on social media. But I would say the challenge for churches, no matter what the size, is segmenting their email list to the point where you're able to email just parents about parents' activities, so people aren't getting burned out.
Exactly.
Do you have any tips for that, or what programs or resources do you all use to successfully market via email?
Well, we tag people in our database, so it's easy to pull a list, for who we want to send to, and we limit the number of emails that can go out in a week. So that again becomes kind of a scheduling, jockeying, for opportunity. But, we don't want someone to get 2 emails a day from Church of the Resurrection. Yeah. So they're always going to get Pastor Adams' weekly email. They're going to get our electronic newsletter. And then we try to work in a couple of segmented emails during the week, but not all on the same day. So it really becomes kind of a scheduling. One thing, Dan, about email that we've had really good response is it does allow people to respond immediately. Yes. So, so you've got a registration link, and people are more likely, if they can just click and respond, they're going to do that rather than have to go back, log in somewhere, find the website, that kind of thing.
Well, out of all of the responsibilities that you have, or all of the sort of theoretical responsibilities of your job, or thematic responsibilities of your job, what do you love most about what you do?
I think what I really love the most is being able to work creatively and collaboratively with a really awesome ministry team. That's what really gets me excited, is to, come up with new ideas. And we're not a place where it's like, well, we've never done that before, or this is how we've always done it. If somebody's got a new idea, we're going to try it. We're going to take some risk, and sometimes they're going to work, and sometimes we're going to learn some important lessons from it. The other thing I think is just being a part of something that's so much bigger than any of us could individually be doing. That's really exciting.
Yeah. Can you talk us through a recent workday or a project? What are some of the first steps that you do when you get to the office or when you're tackling a project?
As the director of the team, a lot of my time is spent meeting with senior staff, meeting with ministries, working with my team, kind of making sure that, all the trains are running. But when a new project comes to our team, the first thing we do is sit down and do some creative brainstorming. And we kind of have a process that we go through for teams. I might share that. Yeah. Most people use something like this, but, we start out, everything that we do, we start out with, is this in line with our purpose and our vision for the church? And those are things that are, in writing, everyone knows them. And before we take on anything, does this align with our purpose and vision? Then we move to identifying the audience and the message. What is that action that we want someone to take? What do we want them to come away from that? And those things, we really try to clarify, both with, whether it's a sermon series or a ministry promotion. What is the audience? What is the message? Then the fun begins after that. Then we really can get into some creative brainstorming, which we do as a team. A good example would be, if we were doing a new sermon series. So we've been working on what we're going to be doing for our sermon series after Easter. So we'll bring people in. We'll talk about, what are some video ideas? What are some print ideas. Is there something along these lines that we could do through social media that would be different? And then we start putting the plan together, putting those together. We'll come up with a couple of different directions, different creative options that we, take back to our senior leadership, to our senior pastor, and get their feedback, refine, then continue to move forward. But it's really exciting to get that creative energy going, to bring people into the room, to talk through ideas, try different things. And when I talk to smaller churches, one of the things that I always really, I am blessed that I have a team that can do that, but you can make your own team. You've got people in your churches that are, are creative, have great ideas. Bring them in, because there's just a synergy that comes together when you're not doing this by yourself.
Well, when we look at specifically what you do throughout the day, are there any apps, gadgets, or tools that you just can't live without?
Well, we use, for our team, we use something called Smartsheet, which is an online, project tracking that works really well for us. I kind of describe it as a spreadsheet on steroids, but smartsheet.com. It's pretty basic, but it's worked for us. Personally, I am playing with a new iPad Pro and pencil and using an app called Nebo, which allows you to take your handwritten notes and then convert them into documents. Because I find myself, out and about, talking to different ministries, going to different meetings, meeting with volunteers. So something that's really portable, that I have it with me and that integrates, with everything else, with my computer, my phone, has been really helpful.
So you are still a fan of taking notes with pen and paper?
I go back and forth. Sometimes I'll do notes on my computer, but I find a lot of times, I'm in a conversation with someone and I want to do something real quick and jot it down. And I was doing pen and paper, then I ended up with all these scraps of paper. So That's what I'm loving about the iPad, that, I've always got it. I can take my notes. They're right there in one place. So that's working well for me.
That's great. And when you're keeping track of what you're responsible for, do you work off that same sheet app, or do you have a personal to-do list program, or is your office filled with Post-it notes, or what's your personal way of keeping on top of productivity?
Yeah, I use an online document that really is just something I've created, my own kind of checklist spreadsheet. I'm also a very visual person, and I do have a big whiteboard. And I like to kind of write big projects, deadlines, things like that on that, because I like that constant visual reminder. So kind of go back both ways.
Yeah, and a little tip that I learned when I was working in college campus ministry and we had no money is that if you can't afford a whiteboard, you can actually go get sheets of shower board from Lowe's for a fraction of the cost, and they work just as well as a whiteboard. They maybe don't erase quite as well, but you can get them clean again. So yeah, that's a little hack. Where do you do most of your work, and what kind of environment do you feel brings the best work out of you? Do you need bright lights? Do you like the lights low? Do you work with music? Can it have lyrics or not? What brings the best work out of you?
It depends on what kind of work I'm doing. We have an open office. Everybody is sharing ideas. Hey, look at this. I like the energy of that for some projects. If I'm trying to write something, and really focus, I need quiet, and that's the point where the headphones come on. And actually, I don't even want music if I'm writing, because I find myself getting too caught up in the lyrics. So
yeah, are there any places around the church that you sometimes sneak out to when you really, really need to focus?
Oh, absolutely. We have a beautiful sanctuary that we opened just a year ago, and I find great inspiration in there. It's quiet. You're just surrounded by a spirit that sometimes when you hit that wall of like, I got nothing left. There's not a creative thought in my head. That's a place that I really go to pray, to recharge, and often find myself really being inspired.
Yeah, absolutely. I sneak away to coffee shops, but I'm still the same. I put in the headphones to try to isolate myself. And it is wonderful though. Like if it's one of those things that you don't think of, your sanctuary really can be a meditative place. And so if it's something that's not hopping during the week, it may be a place to go and focus. It doesn't just have to be the Sunday morning or the weekend office, so to speak. Cathy, what are some of your best tips, shortcuts, or hacks, or some of the best advice that folks have given you for this type of work?
There's a lot of, practical things, what the way you keep track, the way you proofread, things like that. But, I think one of the best just kind of life tips that I've gotten, it has to do with keeping balance. There's a great book called The Accidental Creative that talks about producing things quickly. You can produce things that are really well. And then you also have to maintain this balance. And there's three, if any of those are out of whack, if you're doing too much, it's not going to be the right quality and you're going to burn yourself out. If you're if you're totally focused on the quality, you're not going to be producing enough to keep your job, probably. And if you're trying to do that and not keeping that personal balance, you're going to burn out. And
yeah.
And that's a real challenge in the communication field and the work that we do because, we're all passionate about what we're doing and, we're serving God and it's really tempting to make this a 24/7 kind of job, but you've got to unplug sometimes. You've got to turn off. You've got to, focus on family, on friends, just to keep that balance. So that's one of the best tips one of my mentors gave me. It was kind of, what are you doing to recharge your creativity, to feed your own soul? And I just think over the years, that's one thing that I've had to really focus on myself. And, and I think it's kept me going, kept me doing what I love. We opened a new building last year after several years of capital campaigns, and it was a really intense time for our entire staff. But we had to approach that, as this is a season, and then we had to have some downtime. Yeah. And then even just in your work week, in your day to day, you've got to build in that margin, build in that downtime, because there will be unexpected things that you just have to step in and do. But if you can kind of keep the other things in balance, in check, then you've got some margin for when you need to do that.
Well, obviously, every church is different and every context is different. But speaking generally, if a church had $100 to invest in outreach, how would you recommend they spend it?
I'm going to make the assumption that you're already doing social media, you've already got a website, those types of things, which basically don't cost you anything. If you had $100, I would, and I know this sounds kind of old school, but I would print business cards with our church's basic information, service times, website, and I would provide those to my congregation. This is part of that being invitational. Let your congregation carry a supply of these cards, and when they meet somebody, when they're talking to somebody, they can share that with them. And there's something about when you hand something to someone, as opposed to, hey, let me tell you about my church. It's much more comfortable. It's not threatening. Yeah. And somebody sticks that card in their pocket, and you never know, what's going on in their life, what may spur them to like, maybe I'll check this out. Maybe this is something that I need. So that's one idea. I mean, there's a lot of different things you could do, but that's just one that kind of comes to my mind is I would provide some kind of a tool and make it available to my congregation.
That's great. Yeah, I know that Church of the Resurrection is known for their giveaways. And like you said, you have a very intentional, invitational culture. And it sounds like it's a priority for you all to make that as easy for your members as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, are there any books, podcasts, or other resources that you would recommend our listeners check out?
Well, other than United Methodist Communications.
Thank you.
I have for a number of years have followed the Church Marketing Sucks site, the Center for Church Leadership. Really, any opportunity that you have to just connect with other communicators. I have a couple of other church communication directors here in the Kansas City area that, I get together with for lunch every couple of months, just to kind of share ideas. I would. I might just put in a little plug here for every fall, last week in September, we have a Leadership Institute at Church of the Resurrection that, we'll be doing a whole variety of workshops on communicate. All of our ministry areas do workshops, but we'll be doing a couple on communication. And I always find that I present at a workshop, but I learn as much from the people who come, as they do from me sometimes. So, opportunities to do things like that where you're connecting with other people and sharing ideas are all really great.
Yeah, that's great. That is something that when I was coming up through the candidacy process, they made it a priority to take all of us there to the Leadership Institute. And so I can vouch for how useful and awesome of an experience it is. And like Cathy said, it's not just the content that you learn from the Church of the Resurrection, but it's all the people that you meet. And it's really people from all over. Most of them are United Methodists, but not all of them are United Methodists. And you really do get a chance to make some great connections. Well, this is kind of a broad question to finish on, but where do you see the future of church communications headed?
Technology is really changing the way we do church. When I started out, nobody would have thought that we would be, offering all of our services online and figuring out ways to communicate with these online worshipers. So technology is probably the biggest challenge. How do we use it? And not just how do we use it, but how do we use it effectively? Because people are getting too much information. So how do we focus and have that quality information that doesn't just become noise?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, so that's going to be something that we're going to have to really look at is how do we communicate our message in a way that cuts through the plethora of media that people are inundated with. And, what I've seen more and more is we're kind of becoming isolated through the technology, yet people still yearn for that personal connection. So how do we make that personal connection?
Yeah, absolutely. And even if we don't have the answers, we need to be asking the right questions. And I certainly think that those are some of the questions that are facing us already. And so if we're not answering them yet, or we're not working on them or thinking about them, then we're maybe a little bit behind. Well, Cathy, if anyone wanted to follow the work that you all do at the Church of the Resurrection, or if they wanted to reach out and say hi, what is the best way for them to do that?
Our website is cor.org, and you could email me directly at Cathy, Cathy.Bien, Bien, at cor.org.
Awesome. Well, Cathy, thank you so much for your time today and sharing all your wisdom and experience with us.
Well, thank you. This was fun. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Well, and now, listeners, we've gotten the ball rolling, but like I said at the beginning, we want your help in spotlighting ministries in our church that are making a difference in their communities through marketing and communications. We've already talked to the biggest church in the denomination, so go ahead and send us the smallest church that's making the biggest impact in their community, or anyone in between. Who do you want to hear from, and what should we ask them? You can email us at podcast@umcom.org. That's podcast@umcom.org. And of course, you can always use that email to send us feedback or topic suggestions for the show. We always love hearing from you. And finally, if you have found this podcast to be helpful and you'd like to make sure other church communicators like yourself find this resource, the two biggest things you can do are to share this episode with your friends and colleagues and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, or whatever service you're listening to us on right now. Thanks again for listening to the MyCom Church Marketing Podcast.